About 270 years ago on this very spot, a detachment of redcoats was marching towards their final destination, the military fortress of Fort George. They were walking on a military road, and today you can still walk or drive on a lot of them. In fact, I am walking on one of them now. A network of military roads, sometimes called General Wade's military roads, was constructed in the Scottish Highlands during the middle part of the 18th century as part of an attempt by the British government to bring order to a part of the country which had risen up in the Jacobite rebellion of 1715. The union of the parliaments of Scotland and England had only happened in 1707. So the Hanoverian government in London was still learning to govern a whole United Kingdom, and it feared that the seeds of another rebellion had already been sown. It's interesting to note that at this time Scotland was referred to as North Britain and wasn't called Scotland until the middle of the 19th century. King George I appointed General George Wade as Commander-in-Chief, North Britain. General Wade was sent to Scotland in July 1724, and he reported back in December that more than half of the 22,000 men capable of bearing arms in the Highlands were ready to create new troubles and rise in arms in favour of the Pretender. In his report, Wade reported that the government troops would benefit from improved roads and river crossings to put down the rebels. As an aside, Field Marshal George Wade is the only other person, apart from the monarch, who is mentioned in the national anthem. Lord grant that Marshal Wade may by thy mighty aid victory bring, may he sedition hush, and like a torrent rush, rebellious Scots to crush. God save the King. It was added to the national anthem when the Jacobite army had reached Derby, and it was feared that the fall of London was imminent. This verse was dropped soon after the rebellion was crushed in 1746. It was no longer needed. The roads were constructed to link the central lowlands with a series of fortified barracks located strategically across the Highlands. Their purpose, much like the network of roads constructed by the Romans more than 1,500 years ago, was to suppress and exert control over the local population. The first four of these roads were constructed in the 1720s and 1730s under the direction of General Wade, and are commonly referred to as General Wade's military roads, or simply as Wade's roads. The network was subsequently expanded, and it was expanded considerably under the direction of Major William Caulfield, though his name is now largely forgotten, and each of the roads that he put in place are referred to on Ordnance Survey mapping, for example, simply as Old Military Road. However, there is a Caulfield Road in Inverness, so his name is not totally forgotten. By the end of road building, there was 1,100 miles of new military road in total. I'm now on an original part of the military road as it makes its way across Nairnshire. Many of the roads have been tarred and are still in use today, but this stretch remains in its original state. And notice how straight it is. And that's been a feature of our walk, the number of bits of military road that are straight. That's how Wade wanted them constructed, just like the Romans did before him. The roads themselves were constructed from graded stone and generally quarried from the surrounding landscape. They were built to a width of 18 feet, reducing to 15 feet when necessary. In practice, the narrower width appears to have been used for bridges, perhaps the occasional embankment, and places where the road had to narrow because of physical constraints. Construction took place between April, May and October of each year, the winter months being too harsh for such labours. Work in the summer could be arduous too, with uncertain weather and the presence of the dreaded midge. It is, however, the Highlands of Scotland, and bad weather just goes with the territory. Anyway, as time progressed, it seemed that 15 feet carriageways became the norm, and that structures could become as narrow as 10 or 15 feet. Cost, then as now, was certainly a deciding factor. The construction parties consisted of 100 men, overseen by 2 corporals, 2 sergeants and 2 subalterns, and a captain. And they were generally also accompanied by a drummer, though I'm not quite sure why that should be, perhaps to keep the work on time. Encampments were established at 10-mile intervals, and the inns which developed became known as King's Houses. Some of these continue to serve travellers today, and the well-known King's House on Rannoch Moor sits beside the route made by Wade's successor, William Caulfield. In connection with the construction of the new Fort George at Ardeshir Point to the east of Inverness, Caulfield was instructed to investigate a further, more easterly route between Inverness and Perth. A line from Blairgowrie to Braemar by way of Spittal of Glenshee was surveyed in 1748, and construction began in 1749. The continuation northwards via Corgarth, Granton-on-Spey to Inverness did not begin until 1753. It would be the last of the military roads to be built. The road then ran northwest over the 2,114 foot high Lecht Pass on an alignment largely followed by the modern A939 road to the village of Tomintoul. From Tomintoul the road was constructed westwards to Granton-on-Spey and involved the bridging of 2 significant watercourses. One was at Bridge of On and the other at Bridge of Brown. Beyond Granton-on-Spey, the road ran north and west, crossing the powerful River Findhorn at Dulcie Bridge and continuing northwestwards to cross the River Nairn west of Codder over what is known as the White Bridge. As the military road builders neared their final destination of Fort George, some 3 or 4 miles in that direction, they had one last hurdle to cross, and that was the River Nairn. And in typical General Wade fashion, the road builders decided to build a substantial bridge, and here it is, And it's so substantial that it's still standing today, and not only that, it carried everyday traffic up until a couple of years ago. True testament to the skill of the road builders. It's actually a marvellous feeling to be able to still walk over these bridges. You can hear the water on either side. And in fact, if we look, there is the new road bridge that replaced this one only a couple of years ago. Well, what we have here is an excellent illustration of the straightness of military roads. The one behind me here leads all the way down to Fort George, and it's come from Caulfield Crossroads. It must be about 2 or 3 miles in length, and as you see, as straight as a die. And here's what it was all about: the mighty fortress of Fort George. An impregnable base for government soldiers, Fort George was constructed in the wake of the 1745 Jacobite rebellion, which has seen its predecessor, Inverness Castle, fall to the rebels. It took over 21 years to complete and was later modified for a coastal defence role because of the Napoleonic War that took place towards the end of the 18th century. The fort is named for King George II, who had it built to prevent any further Jacobite risings in the north. And that helps explain why the most impressive defences of Fort George are directed inland instead of those out to sea. Those defences are quite extraordinary. Fort George is the most imposing artillery fort in the UK and possibly in Europe. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our historical journey as we travelled across Nairnshire from mountain to sea. You can travel the road yourself, either by car, bike, or as I did, on foot. However you do it, you'll be travelling in the footsteps of the redcoats, clansmen, and all the other people who had cause to journey to this maybe not so quiet corner of the Scottish Highlands.